Good morning, Commissioner, Council, Mr. Raymond. May I proceed, Commissioner?
Please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Raymond. We left off yesterday talking about the arrangements being made for the MTO skid testing on the Red Hill Valley Parkway, which we know did take place on October 16th, 2007. So now if we could go to Registrar Overview Document 4, image 60, please. And in paragraph 137, if you could call that out, please. Thank you. On October 17th, the day following the testing, Mr. Marciello emailed you and Ms. Lane the friction test results from the Red Hill, and you can read what he said there. First of all, they only tested in the two southbound lanes, and he attached the results, and then we'll get to the results in a minute. But in the third paragraph, he says Dufferin and Phillips Engineering and Andrews Dulles Reyes are eager for the results. Do you know if the results were provided to Dufferin or Phillips?
I do not. I did not include them in my email where I shared the results with Ludmir Uzarowski, and I don't really have, it's never a commitment to provide the information to Dufferin or Phillips Engineering. This is really the first time that it had come up, and I didn't take too much notice of it because I wasn't intending to share the results with them. That would be left up to Ludmir Uzarowski and or the city after the information was shared with them from Ludmir Uzarowski.
So you didn't share it with them, and you're not aware of it having been shared with them. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And in the last paragraph, Mr. Marciello wrote, note friction numbers below 30 were collected in areas situated directly under overhead structures, parentheses, least likely to get weathered. Do you recall what you made of that statement?
Yeah, and it's something that we'd seen in other early SMA friction testing on MTO projects, is that directly under a bridge, that the numbers didn't rise as quickly. And I can't speak to if being under a bridge impacts long-term friction results, because I wasn't really extensively involved in reviewing long-term friction information. And just to come back to the theory, and I know that a lot of it is a lot of the increase in friction related to early age SMA is wearing of the asphalt film off the surface from tires, and that's a lot of the discussion. But there's also it's understood that you will also get weathering of that asphalt's film on the surface over time. And I think anyone that's seen a brand new paved roadway, and it doesn't have to be SMA. It's quite black at the start, and then if you go over it a year later, it's very likely to be gray, or more specifically, the color of a lot of the aggregates that were used in that pavement. And again, that's can be largely from weathering, especially outside of the wheel paths.
Okay, so if I've understood you correctly, that correlation, if we can call it, had been observed on prior SMA projects where there had been initial lower friction number results located underneath overhead structures. Is that right?
That's correct. It had been flagged or noted on some previous MTO projects.
Okay, and am I correct in understanding that although it had been noted, there hadn't been study done or investigations into that correlation? Is that right?
That's right. It was more of a noted aspect, and appreciate too that the numbers are lower, but only a few friction numbers lower.
Okay. And do you recall, was any more rigorous study done subsequently on that issue, or no?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And there wasn't. I mean, it's noted here, but really, not much was ever taken, or not aware of anything being pursued to investigate that. It wasn't a concern. It was just a noted aspect that gives some explanation on why some individual numbers under structures might be a little bit different or lower from sort of the mean of what you're getting. And I think we touched yesterday a little bit. You look at the mean, but you also look at some of the variability as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And then Registrar, if you could take that down and go to the results themselves, which are at images 61 and 62. And I wonder, could you expand both of those charts so they're a little more visible? Great. Thank you. And so on the left-hand side, we've got southbound lane 1, and on the right, southbound lane 2. And do you recall at the time reviewing the results themselves rather than just his email?
So when I received the results, I looked at the results, I reviewed the results, but it was never the intention that we would provide anything more than the results to Ludomir Uzarowski. I mean, we do not provide an interpretation of those results. Although I will note that I did note the lower friction numbers under the structure, but that's not what I consider to be an interpretation. It's more of just a supplemental explanation of some of the results.
So we'll get to your email when we get there. But you're saying yes, you did review the actual.
I reviewed it internally for internal purposes. Yes.
Okay. And what was your view of them at the time? What did you think?
I thought they were good. They didn't have any concerns with them. In fact, the numbers were quite a bit higher than we were typically seeing on MTO projects.
And from that, I take it you mean MTO new SMA projects.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And when you say that the results were good, do I understand you correctly that you mean they were good in the context of it being a new SMA placement?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
And you have spoken about it, the issue more generally about the readings below FN 30, and you just briefly mentioned it. There are 5 of them in total that are below FN 30, with the minimum being in lane 1 of 28.1 and the minimum in lane 2 being 28.4, as described there. And so if you can just describe what your thought was about those results specifically.
Well, they some of them, tied into the fact that they were under bridges. I guess all of them are. The results also tie into the fact that, whenever you have a group of statistical data like this, you're going to have some on the high side, some on the low side, and then you're going to have your mean. Other than noting the bridge portion of things, the results, there's none of those results that give me a lot of concern or much. Yeah, there are, you mentioned 5 under 30, but they're not significantly under 30 to worry me, though. Same way as if they were in the low 20s.
Right. And just to cover something before, you've discussed an issue, for example, of the Highway 401 placement and testing around the same time, and the pause on SMA. And did the pause have anything to do with the Red Hill results?
It did not. I mean, the pause had to do quite a bit with that Woodstock project, but it also had to do with our complete database of SMA projects, which the Red Hill now came into that database, but it wasn't. It was unique in the sense that it had an aggregate that wasn't on the MTO's designated sources of material. And I would say it's also worth noting that the numbers that were achieved were not concerning in the same way as some of our other MTO projects, which were below 30 as an average. Right.
Okay.
There is the difference here that this, I believe, was tested at 90. I don't see it in the headers, but oh yeah, there it is. The testing speed was 90 versus 100.
That's right. And so the significance of that being that you would expect at a lower speed that the friction number that's returned would be higher than at a higher speed.
That's correct.
And if we could go to, take those down, please, Registrar, and go to, I guess it's just paragraph 139 there at the bottom of image 62. And if you could call that out, please. And so the next day, October 18th, you emailed the results to Dr. Uzorowski and Andros Delis Reyes at Golder. that we were just discussing. And see what you wrote. You attached the results and said, please pass the results on to those involved with the project. And you made note of, as you indicated before, that you may wish to note that some of the friction numbers less than 30 correlate with being located under a structure. Should you have any questions regarding the results, please do not hesitate to contact us. And then we'll leave this up, but Dr. Uzorowski replied thanking you and saying he would discuss the results with the city. And that's at paragraph 140, just for the record. So do you recall before or after sending this, whether you had any oral discussions with Dr. Uzorowski or Mr. Delis Reyes about the results?
As far as I can remember, I had no discussion with Dr. Uzorowski, and the same for Mr. Reyes. I don't think I've ever spoken to Mr. Reyes.
Okay. Without being asked to, would you have volunteered any further information about it?
If you'd called up to ask me, information about the test results, I would provide him clarification on what's in the test results, but I would not walk him through an interpretation or give him an interpretation, if that makes sense, right? If he's talking about the, so if he had a question about, just what, I don't know, what the information is provided and whether or not this was a ribbed tire or a smooth tire, or if he asked what speed it was done, and I would, I know it's on there, but sometimes you don't. I had to take a second look at it to find out where it was on there and that sort of stuff.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the particulars of the chart and what the data said, if I'm understanding you correctly, as opposed to an interpretation of what it meant. Is that?
That's right. And I was always very cognizant that we do not want to provide an interpretation of the results.
Do you mean generally or in this circumstance?
I haven't done it a lot, but certainly in this circumstance, and I think again, generally, it all depends on what the sort of relationship of why we're providing services to an external entity. If there's some sort of an inherent agreement that we would also provide interpretation, but providing results is one thing, providing results and interpretation is quite a different thing, and we certainly are aware of that separation.
Okay, and why that separation? Could you describe why that is? Why you would not typically provide an interpretation of the results?
That's what I've always understood is a ministry position. I assume it relates to the legalities of then being responsible for how data is interpreted, and there's always a lot of judgment that can go into interpretation, and that goes through a lot more than just friction results. It's again, as simple as you putting out a contract. We provide borehole information, but not borehole interpretation of what that means and sort of stuff. That we leave that typically for the bidders to make their own interpretation based on information provided.
Okay, and just strikes me, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but one concern would be, you, the MTO, haven't done an analysis of of the road itself. You haven't looked at the road itself. You haven't looked at the things that can go into whether or not any particular result might be concerning, like the geometry of it or traffic patterns, collision history, and that sort of thing. And given what you have described about the approach to friction numbers and friction number results, that in the absence of that information, providing an interpretation is a difficult thing to do. Is that fair?
Well, that is correct. That it is difficult to make a full interpretation of safety on things because we don't know all the information. But even it's just, I think from just a legal liability, it's not something we would provide an interpretation on, right? And I think it does tie into the reasons that you mentioned there.
So if we could pull that down for a moment and go to image 65 of overview document 4. And it's paragraph 146. And so the next day, October 19th, Dr. Uzorowski emails you, Mr. Delos Reyes, about British pendulum testing on the Red Hill. And he writes, Chris, I talked to the city of Hamilton today. You can go ahead with the British pendulum testing on the SMA on the Red Hill Valley Parkway before it is open to traffic. Please let Andrew Delos Reyes from Golder know when you'll be doing the testing. And then Andrew, when you get the information from Chris, please let Marco, Walter, and James know. So in there, would this suggest to you that you had a discussion with Dr. Uzorowski following your sending him the friction test results? It suggests there must have been a prior conversation you had with him about British pendulum testing, I assume.
I assume I don't know where this came up from. I wasn't directly involved so much in the British pendulum testing. That was Joseph Panaya that was involved in that, and I hadn't seen much for British pendulum test results to really make an interpretation of those results. And we didn't typically do British pendulum testing on a lot of on our MTO highways. So I think we were getting some cores that may have been sampled in the lab. So maybe I should let Joseph Panaya speak to that, because I really wasn't involved in the British pendulum testing, and don't remember seeing much for British pendulum testing results.
Okay, well that's fine, but you nonetheless were talking here in writing to Dr. Uzorowski about it. So putting aside for the moment your overall involvement with British pendulum testing at the MTO, I want to know about, in this instance, would you agree with me that you must have had a discussion? There's nothing prior to this about British pendulum testing, but you must have had a discussion with Dr. Uzorowski about it in order for him to send you this email. He wouldn't just send it to you out of the blue, presumably.
I had some communication with him. It could have been verbal. Yes. And okay, since we don't have a record of any email, it was likely verbal, or it may have come from somebody else to him, and then he was coming back to me on it, but it would more likely have come from me.
Okay. And again, though, if presumably if you got this out of the blue and you hadn't spoken with him or someone else about it in relation to the Red Hill, you would have been surprised by it and then talk about, it's like, what are you talking about? mean, isn't that fair?
Well, I was aware that that Joseph Panaya was doing British pendulum testing with, and I believe Chris Rogers was involved in that. And so there may have been internal MTO discussions about wanting to pursue that testing.
Okay, so you think then are you saying you think that the idea for British pendulum testing on the Red Hill probably came from the MTO rather than from Dr. Uzorowski or the city?
I think there's a good likelihood of that. I will be right up front with you and tell you that I just don't recall. But you know, MTO was doing both the skid testing as well as the British pendulum testing. I'm not sure what Dr. Uzorowski would require British pendulum testing to supplement the skid testing information that we already had. I believe well, I should let Joseph Panaya and Chris Rogers speak to the purpose of the British pendulum testing. But one of the purposes that I believe that it was for is that it allowed you to take a core of that pavement and ship it to the lab and do testing and do the British pendulum testing, which can be done in the lab or it can be done in the field, versus the skid trailer, which has to be coordinated. And I believe that Frank Marciello, he did a great job accommodating the priority for early age friction testing, but he said, you know, I've got a list of other friction testing on other pavements that, you know, I like to schedule, and you know, I do them anytime I want, or schedule them in appropriately for the year. And you know, you're asking me to go out, you know, basically with a week's notice to go out and do this stuff. So it complicated his schedule. And there were times where if he was up in Northern Ontario, you know, he can't necessarily come down and do testing on Woodstock for early age friction, which has some time sensitivity. So if you could take a core, ship it to the lab, and then you've got the ability to get a measurement of friction through a different means that has more flexibility in terms of timing. It also would, I believe, tie into the fact that, you know, when you do a mixed design or laboratory testing, before you start your paving, you then get a laboratory sample of that mix that you can do British pendulum testing on, which of course you cannot do skid testing on because you only have that sample that's made up in the laboratory.
When you talk about British pendulum testing on a mix, I mean, if at that point it hasn't solidified, if I can put it, it hasn't been placed. Are you talking about doing the British pendulum testing as part of polished stone value testing on the aggregates themselves after they've been extracted? Is that what you're referring to?
No. So let me back up. You know, so if you place a mix, you can go and take a core of that mix and ship it down, and then that's asphalt mix. But before you place any asphalt mix, you have to do the engineering to basically proportion your asphalt cement, your aggregate gradations, and stuff like that. So you do that. You do that on paper, and then you will also you'll then mix up a small sample of it in the laboratory, where you mix the aggregates and the asphalt cement. You will then so you'll mix it up, and then you'll compact it to a standard compaction, and it's largely your proportions are based a lot on volumetric. So again, depending on how that compacts, that'll get you your optimum amount of asphalt cement. So then you will have a hardened, it's called a briquette, but it's similar to an actual core, and that is of the mix, and you can do British pendulum on that mix. Nobody typically does that unless you wanted to get a indication of what you would be getting for early age SMA friction, because you're going to have a totally unweathered surface on that laboratory briquette. The other thing that you need to consider is the whole laboratory mixed procedure is a good simulation of what will happen mixing your asphalt and aggregates through an asphalt plant, and then trucking them to the project, running them through your paver and your rolling operation to give your finished product. But as much as it is a good simulation, it is not a perfect simulation. But again, that's what the laboratory procedure does. It's the best laboratory simulation that you can have to determine that information.
Okay, so if I've understood you correctly, you do not have a specific recollection of the discussions, of any discussions that you had about the British pendulum testing, but you agree that it is likely you did have some discussion with Dr. Uzorowski prior to this email, although you don't have any specific recollection of it. And you don't know, but potentially you gave a couple of reasons why Golder was asking for it. Sorry, why the MTO might have wanted it to be done, although again you don't have a specific recollection. Is that fair?
That is fair. I do have a recollection that MTO was doing some British pendulum testing on samples. But
yes, no, I get that. Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Uzorowski testified that he thought, his recollection was that the MTO wanted to do it, the British pendulum testing, and that he believes it was because the MTO wanted to use the data to compare and correlate between skid testing and British pendulum testing. Does that ring any bell with you, or no?
It does not ring a bell with me, but it seems logical. And I come back to my earlier statement that I know that we were doing British pendulum, and I believe the reason was to try and correlate between the two, and then with that correlation, you would have the opportunity to measure mixes before they're placed, as well as cores that are placed. Probably thinking about it more, probably the better use for your British pendulum testing is that you can do laboratory mixes on various mix variations, and then evaluate the different friction levels from your British pendulum, right? And we've explained, or I've explained that for a laboratory mix sample, British pendulum testing is the only, you can't do the skid trailer.
Right, of course. Can't drive on a lab sample.
You can't drive it. It's a 6-inch core, so you'd have to hit that spot pretty good.
Got it. Now, just then coming back though, if it's likely that you had a discussion with Dr. Uzorowski, and this is on October 19th, he's talking about having spoken to the city of Hamilton about the British pendulum testing. in light of that, though, am I correct? You don't recall having any corollary discussion with him about the skid test results. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, when talking about the skid test results several minutes ago, you explained about the general approach and about not interpreting the skid test results when dealing with a third party, and you explained why that was. And I appreciate that you thought that these results were, as you described, good in the context of early age friction. What if you were, from the results, doesn't have to be these results, but from any results in involving a third party, if you from those skid test results were aware of or suspected a safety issue arising from the results, what would you do then?
That's an excellent question. I think certainly one of the things would be to consult with some other people in the ministry. It would be obviously sharing the results and asking, in this case, Dr. Uzarowski, what his interpretation is and what his action is going to be in response to them, right? And if we're satisfied with that being an appropriate action to mitigate the situation, then that I believe that would alleviate our concerns of being aware of a safety situation that needs to be addressed, in that it's being addressed satisfactorily. So then we don't have to go in and wave the flag that there's a concern. And again, if it's not, we would tend to not direct others on how best to alleviate a concern, as long as we're satisfied that they're taking appropriate action or are appropriately aware of the situation.
Okay, so if I understood you from that example, and I appreciate that wasn't the case in this particular instance, but if you had provided the results and they caused you concern and you gave it to them, and then the person you were providing them to says, whoa, those look really low. We've got to do something about this. We're going to lower the speed limit. We're going to have a look at things. We're going to investigate and figure it out. If I interpreting what you're saying correctly, your point of view is that would likely satisfy you that they understood the gravity of the situation, and therefore there was nothing else that the MTO needed to do. Is that fair from what you described?
I think in the overall picture, I would add that, it would not, that I would not make that conclusion that everything is now fine on my own. It would be in consultation with other people in the ministry and perhaps as well some legal perspective to make sure that, now that this is occurred, that whether we fulfilled a duty to the public or a duty to ensure that things have been sufficiently resolved.
Right. It wouldn't have been just you certainly would have talked to others, potentially the legal department, but certainly others, and decided what to do. That's understandable. But as a professional engineer as well, if there was a safety issue and you were quite clear on that, am I correct that if you weren't satisfied that it was understood by the recipient of the information, that you would feel that you needed to take some sort of not action meaning physically, but on the road, but to advise them of that there are at least concerns. Is that fair?
That is fair. I'm well aware of my obligation as a professional engineer to ensure that any safety issue that I become aware of is adequately addressed.
Okay, and then just to give, because we have that example, if it was a third party road and that got the results from the 407 at Woodstock, sorry, 401 at Woodstock around the same time that you discussed yesterday and a little bit today with numbers in the low 20s. And is that something where, again, you would feel at that point that you need to highlight this with them and say that they need to look at it? Just wondering at what point it might cross that threshold.
Yeah, and I think that's a hypothetical question that
it is.
You know, and again, you know, I believe that my actions would involve seeking peer advice from others in the ministry, and again, more legal advice to ensure that you know, both my responsibility as a professional engineer as well as the ministry's responsibility as an agency that now is also aware of this situation and how we basically cover our responsibilities and ensure that they are fulfilled in this.
I understand that. I'm not asking you to try to figure out what the legal advice would be, but I just suggest to you that if you got the results that were at the very least in the low 20s when the MTO itself would have been did take measures to deal with it in the early age friction context, that you would have at least advised a third party that they ought to at least think about taking some measures because the results are concerning.
Commissioner, sorry to interrupt. I think Mr. Raymond has answered this question as best he can. It is a hypothetical situation that's being asked of him to comment on. So I think he's answered this question already.
Sorry, I was muted there. I think, Mr. Lewis, we've had the question put a couple of times and we've got the answer.
Okay, thank you. Okay. It appears, just with respect, coming back briefly to the British pendulum testing, if we could go to overview document 4, image 70. And we 157. We may come back to this for another purpose about blast track, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But in the last sentence of an email on November 2nd, 2007 from you to Dr. Uzorowski, you state, I think that the pendulum testing of the SMA will not happen. Do you have any recollection of why it will not happen? And our understanding is it didn't happen. Do you recall why?
I don't recall. You know, I wasn't directly involved with that, with the pendulum testing. That was sort of a subgroup of the early friction SMA, and I think the question would be better answered by Joseph Panay or Chris Rogers. I suspect that you know, they probably were were unable to schedule going out there, or may not have seen a need for that pendulum testing. I can't speak to the reasons why.
Okay, you just don't recall at this point?
I just don't recall.
Okay. You can take that down, Registrar. Thank you. And if we could go to image 81. And in paragraphs 185 and 186, there's some emails between Ms. Lane and Mr. Kazmarowski about the Red Hill friction test results that we were just discussing. Ms. Lane, she asked by Mr. Kazmarowski about who they've been shared with, and she's not sure if he shared them, if Mr. Raymond shared them with the MTO task group members, and then she sends the results to Mr. Tam, Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Billings, who are all on the task group, at the SMA task group at that time. Do you recall if there was any discussion amongst the task group, the SMA task group, about the SMA results? Sorry, the SMA results, the Red Hill SMA results?
I don't recall. A lot of times the SMA task group would look at more summary information of results rather than individual results, and individual results would be looked at by myself and a couple other key people, and then sort of incorporated into the larger database of information that would then go forward to the task group.
And then there is no mention, I can tell you, in the task group minutes of those results specifically. So in talking with other members of specifically of the task group, do you recall if you had any discussions about the Red Hill results with Dennis Billings specifically?
I doubt that I would have had discussions with Dennis Billings. No, I doubt that would have I doubt that would have happened, and I doubt that I would have, the discussion that would have happened regarding the individual results specific to, we would do a smaller group review of it, and then that would go into sort of a larger database that then would go forward to the task group typically. Right.
No, I understand that. But if I take it, so, you don't recall any discussions with Mr. Billings?
I do not, nor do I of the task group members specifically. I don't think Bob Gorman was part of the group, and Becca Lane, I guess, and I can't remember if Mr. Kazmarowski was, but I believe those are the people that would have participated with me in the review. Oh, I think I've lost Sam.
No, that was just me not talking.
Oh, okay.
Just finding my place to go to the next topic. Okay, if we could, Registrar, go to image 65 in overview document 4. And this is about an issue that you raised yesterday, and then we parked it, so to speak, to talk about today because of the timing in which it it arose. So in paragraph 147 on October 22nd, so now we're 6 days after the skid testing on the Red Hill, Dr. Uzorowski sent an email to you with the subject line pavement shot blasting, and then he wrote what's indicated in that email, if you could call that up. And he provides the name of the company, is Blast Track, and the website, and a little bit of information about it, and that he can give you a contact for it. And so Blast Track, as I understand it, that's a company that does a surface treatment to improve surface friction. Is that correct?
They are a company that does essentially shot blasting of the pavement surface to restore friction. Yes.
Okay. And did this issue have anything to do with the Red Hill?
It did not. The discussion came up when Dr. Uzorowski had contacted me and asked me about the rumor of early age SMA, or the, I don't know if it was a rumor or whether it was or if he was aware that we were having concerns with early age friction on SMA. And during that discussion, I'd given him an overview of the early age SMA issue and some of the work that MTO was doing to sort of resolve the issue, and I'm sure it would have got into the aggregate side of things, and you know, it mentioned that, you know, we were looking at treatments as well, and he I believe was the one that mentioned, well, have you tried I don't know if he called it Blast Track, but he, you know, have you tried basically the shot blasting? And I think because I believe the typical use, and I believe he flagged that, you know, Blast Track is used at airports to remove the rubber tire accumulation that happens from airplanes landing. So he had asked if we brought that up, and I said I wasn't aware of it, and that he was going to give me the information of the company and a contact name. So this is kind of the first part of that, and it was to fit in with the MTO's review of sort of treatment options that could be done.
Okay, so are you saying, because when you first started your answer, you indicated the discussion came up when Dr. Uzorowski contacted me and asked me about a rumor about early age SMA, or if he was aware we were having concerns with early age friction on SMA. Are you talking about this issue specifically having been raised in your conversation with him on July 31st, 2007, or are you talking about some later date?
I can't say specifically which of those two dates it was, but it did come up from him, and it's something that I asked him for further information for MTO to look at as one of our options for resolving the problem.
Okay. And if we could go to page, image 74 and 75. And in paragraph 167 and 168, there's some emails back and forth between you and Mr. Bowers on November 16, 2007, about, and that's Greg Bowers of Blast Track, and you're on the subject of inquiry regarding Blast Track technology. And then he responds with some information about it. And then if we could go, you had a chance to look at that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then if you could take that down, Registrar, and pull up just 170 and 171. Actually, maybe, yeah. Sorry, I meant the paragraphs. If we could go back to 75 and 76, images 75 and 76. And if it's actually 170 and 171 for both those paragraphs. Thank you. So in these paragraphs on November 21st, 2007, Mr. Bowers emails you and Ms. Lane a budget and a quote to provide a demonstration, and you email him back on the 22nd. You're talking about a trial, and you indicate that the pavement you were proposing will no longer work for the demonstration because it's being open to traffic this week and winter has arrived. Do you recall what highway you were talking about?
I do not, and I don't recall if I actually had a highway at this time in mind. Appreciate that. I'm pretty sure Greg Bowers was located in Atlanta, and I believe there is one Blast Track machine that would work throughout North America. So it's really getting an indication of when that machine might be available to come to Ontario for, you know, quite a small you know, one day or one night trial, right? You know, we're kind of fitting into their schedule, and then, you know, when after he was going to come back to me and tell me when it was available, you know, we've got SMA projects going, you know, pretty consistently at the ministry. It's easy then to see if we've got to fit it into an existing project, provided we're not into December where our projects are no longer going. As you can appreciate, if this was July, it would likely be, that's great, and then I could reach out to the 1, 2, or 3 SMA projects that we might have had going at that time, and then try to facilitate a demonstration of their product to see if it was in fact capable of providing us the results that that we were looking for.
Okay. If I could, Registrar, could you take that down, and could we go to MTO 1413? And these are emails between you involving you and Mr. Marciello. It's the first one at the bottom where he sends on November 15th, 2007, results from friction. The subject line is friction on SMA and contract 2007 2131 with reduced AC trial, and indicating that it's in the middle of the Rouge River structure in Ajax, so somewhere in Durham region. Rouge River to Ajax. And then there's a further email above from you to someone named Sadar Singh on the issue. So that's going around the same time. Is that a pavement that you were suggesting, that you were thinking of doing the blast track trial on?
It may have been. Again, I can't remember if I had a project in mind at the time, or if in fact I was seeing when they were available and then would reach out and see what projects we had going.
Okay. If we could just make that an exhibit, please, Commissioner. It would be Exhibit 49.
Noted, Council.
Thank you. Okay, and if we could go to now, take that down and go to MTO 13349. These are the minutes from the SMA main task group on April 14, 2008. So jumping ahead, and it indicates that you were one of the people present at that meeting, that there were 8 people present. And then in number 3, if you could call up that paragraph, please, Registrar. There's a reference at that meeting to blast track technology and your conclusions. Do you recall this?
I don't recall the meeting specifically, but this would be consistent with what would have happened at a meeting, and you know, that we were continuing to evaluate various technologies, and that for the blast track technology, we continued to have concerns with the shot pellets, you know, as they would hit that rich asphalt surface, that they would gum up with asphalt cement, and then, you know, they get recycled back in, I believe, and then, you know, you've got a shot pellet coated with excess AC after a couple cycles through, and then it's going to lose its effectiveness to remove additional asphalt cement. So essentially gumming up the shot pellets.
Okay, thank you. Could take that down, please. And sorry, you can take that document away. So in 2008, you were at that point, the senior pavement design engineer, right? That's the position you occupied from June 2007 to July 2009?
I don't have my resume in front of me, but I believe you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just.
That's about the right
That's
time.
what it says. That's what your CV says. Okay.
Yeah, that's and that would be about the right time. Yeah, and my CV would be correct.
All right. If we could go to image 84 in overview document 4, please. And as you'll see in paragraphs 193 and 94, 194, Mr. Marciello conducted conducted skid testing on the Red Hill on June 12th, 2008. And then he emailed, sorry, this is just in 193, and then he emailed the results to Mr. Bob Gorman, to you, and Joseph Pania on June 18th, 2008. And so at that point, given the role that you were in, do you know why you were receiving those results?
I believe I was receiving them because I had been involved with the Red Hill test results, the initial set of testing on them. So he assumed that I was still involved from that sense. I believe I was still a member of the task group, although Mr. Joseph Pania was, I believe, the project manager at this time.
On the task group?
On the task group.
Right. So when you say that you believe you were receiving them because you had previously been involved and maybe because of the task group, do you know that, or that you were receiving them for those reasons, or is that just what you at this point speculate?
It's what I speculate. I don't know why Frank Marciello emailed me on them. I don't recall, nor do I think that I was ever involved in any follow-up testing on the for the Red Hill. I can speculate that it had to do something with the aggregate source and being involved in inclusion on the designated sources for materials, which would explain Bob Gorman's name on that list. You know, I'm assuming myself from the initial involvement and Joseph Pania, because he was involved with the as a project manager, I believe, at that time now for the early age SMA task group. Although, you know, in terms of the relation, it is useful information to help understand that the friction growth that occurs over time with early age friction, but it wasn't, it was never a request that I had made to have that follow-up done. Again, there were no concerns with the initial testing done, so there's no need or no reason to believe that it would be anything that, you know, that the early age SMA issue was not a concern for the Red Hill Valley Parkway, and there was no never an understanding or that we would be doing long-term commitment as far as I was aware.
Okay, so we've heard, and we're going to hear that the testing in 2008 and subsequently was for the purpose of a designated source materials application. So I was just wondering why you were receiving them, and you've answered that. Do you recall whether you reviewed the results at the time?
I cannot say for sure, but I think I opened them up out of a curiosity. Again, you know, I'm on the email, but you know, Bob Gorman would have been looking at it from the DSM side of it, and in terms of you know, updating the database of early SMA projects. I believe Joseph Panaya was the project manager at that time, and that would have been his role. And I don't believe I did anything more than open them up. I may not have even done that, but I think I would have opened them up just out of a curiosity. And I believe that they had, as one would expect. Well, I'm assuming you're going to take me to those results at some point. So,
well, I'm wondering how you, and we can absolutely go to them. Do you recall how you what you thought about them at the time?
I think it would help my memory if we. I mean, I don't remember how I thought about them at the time, but if you bring them up, I can tell you how I think I would have thought about them at that time.
We'll bring up two at a time. So Registrar, if you could bring up MTO, and might as well do this in the native format, MTO 24002 and 24003. And 24003 is the second one. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so there's a little out of order. This is on the left, southbound lane 2, and on the right, northbound lane 1, with average FN of 38.2 and 41.2 respectively. If you haven't looked at that, let me know when you've looked at it, and then we can just pull up the other two.
Yeah, I've had a quick look here.
Thank you. And Registrar, if you could do the same thing with 24004 and 24005. Thank you. And then we have, we see our averages of, in northbound lane 2, an average of 38.7, and in southbound lane 1, an average FN of 40.3. So just let me know when you've had a chance on this.
I've had a look at them. I mean, it's not a detailed look, but I think from what I've seen here, it probably would have, you know, I don't think I would have given it too much more of a look back at the time, since it was more a look out of curiosity.
Right, and then the numbers have increased since 2007. Is that, and if you could go to the chart tab on both of those. Registrar. The one on the right only has, the one on the left only has the results from 2008, but you can see the comparison from the one on the right from 2007, having gone up as an average from 33 to 40. So are these the kind of results you that you would have expected to see based on early age SMA low friction a year later?
These are good results. I mean, you know, appreciating we didn't in 2007 we only did the southbound lanes, so we didn't have anything from the northbound lanes. But you know, you've got quite a nice increase in friction, and so basically your early age SMA masking of the aggregate is that asphalt film has worn off, and you've achieved quite a good friction level when you're talking you know, 38s, 39, 40s. That's not something that that I would look at too much, and I would say that it might even be a little bit better than what we were typically getting on some of our MTO projects, to which an explanation might be the 90 km/h test speed.
So that's a longer answer, but to my question was, is it what you would have expected to see after a year, or actually less than a year, because this is in June 2008 and the prior testing was in October of 2007. So is that sort of increase in line with what you had expected based on your experience with new SMA placements?
Yeah, this would be in line with my expectations.
Okay. Take those down, please, Registrar. Thank you. And we know that the MTO conducted skid testing in each year from 2009 to 2012, and then again in 2014. Were you involved in any way in the skid testing in those years?
I was not, and I only became aware of that such testing was done last summer through the start of this inquiry.
Okay, thank you. Last thing I want to ask you about is skid testing on the QEW and Red Hill interchange in 2009. So if we could go to overview document 4, images 118 and 119. And paragraph 284 and 285 just have some, actually, sorry, make sure I have it. Yeah, some background about it, and that Dufferin was the paving contractor for that project contract 2005-2008 at the QEW Red Hill interchange, which was an MTO project, and friction testing was conducted on July 29th, 2009, and in paragraph 286, and you didn't receive this email, it's the next one I'll take you to. I just want to place it for you. If you see at the top of image page 119, there's preliminary results indicate average friction numbers throughout all lanes range from 32 to 36. And then if you go to the next image, Registrar. Paragraph 289. If you could expand that, please. Mr. Marciello emailed Ms. Lane, Joseph Delamora, and you with the test results on that trial. placed on the QEW at the Red Hill interchange, and indicates early friction appears to be improving, and the results show the average in each of the 5 lanes tested ranging between 33 and 35.4. Do you recall this project and your receiving these results?
I don't recall it specifically, but I don't doubt that I received them.
Okay, but you don't have any specific recollection of your involvement in this?
I do not.
Okay.
Well, I would have. It looks like I would have been involved to some degree. I don't recall what that was.
Okay. Okay. I don't have any further questions, Commissioner. Subject to any questions you have at this time, I would turn it over to Council for the participants. I haven't this morning canvassed order, so the order of questioning. If Council could advise who would like to go first. Or if anyone has no questions, you advise that, and then we could sort that out.
Commissioner, I just have a short series of questions,
Okay.
but I'm indifferent as to order.
Ms. Lorian, will you have any questions?
I have no questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr.
Ms. Janine Roberts?
We just have a handful of questions as well. Our estimate's gone down since yesterday. I'm happy to have Ms. Jennifer Roberts go first.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Then let's turn the podium over to Ms. Roberts, Jennifer Roberts.
Thank you. Mr. Raymond, hello, I'm Jennifer Roberts, Counsel for Golder. Commissioner, may I begin?
Please proceed.
So, Mr. Raymond, I just want to take you back to some testimony of earlier this morning. This is on the hypothetical issue of if the numbers on the Red Hill had been so low as to raise a safety concern, what would you have done? Do you remember that?
Yep.
Okay, and in your answer, if I caught it right, you said you would consult with others within the ministry, share the results, and speak with Dr. Uzarowski and find out what his interpretation was and what action would be in response. And I just want to follow up on that thought. You're not suggesting in your answer that Dr. Uzarowski had authority to make a decision about a response on behalf of the City of Hamilton, are you?
No, I'm not. I would, and maybe if I can go back and clarify, you know, the first thing I would do is reach out internally and within the ministry and we would brainstorm the appropriate action that you know that fulfills my duty as well as the ministry's duty. We would not I cannot see us withholding the information. We would reach out to Dr. Uzarowski, and I'm speculating or hypothesizing that, you know, one way would be to ask him what collectively for the project the response was going to be. But to answer your question, and then assuming that for the project team overall was doing something that satisfies things that would very likely satisfy my responsibilities and the ministry's responsibilities. But to answer your question directly, I did not in any way interpret that Dr. Uzarowski has full authority for the project, and I very much would be of the understanding that he is working for the city.
So if I'm understanding your answer, your view is you could contact Dr. Uzarowski because that's a conduit for communication with the city of Hamilton. Do I have that right?
You did. That was the conduit that I was using for that project, and including the city. Yes. But
ultimately, your responsibility as a professional engineer is to ensure that concern, this hypothetical concern, actually gets delivered to a decision maker for the city of Hamilton, is it not?
I would have to look at my obligations to that specific nuance, but you know, I'm not saying that had there been a specific concern that I would have not ensured that it went to the city of Hamilton as well. I also appreciate that Dr. Uzarowski is also a professional engineer with the similar obligations that I have as a professional engineer, but that does not alleviate myself or the city of, or sorry, not the city, the ministry of our obligations.
Right. So ultimately, the responsibility would be to ensure that the information had been reported to the city of Hamilton.
Again, that would be a clarification that I would seek through the internal discussions within an MTO.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Ms. Janine Roberts.
Thank you, Commission Counsel. Dr. Raymond, I'm counsel for the City of Hamilton, and I just have a few questions following up on your testimony earlier this morning and yesterday. First, with respect to the 2007 friction results on the Red Hill, am I right that, to your knowledge, no one else at the MTO who received the results had any concerns with respect to the friction levels?
That is correct. I was never aware of any concerns related to that from anyone at the ministry.
Okay, and then for the 2008 results, I know you've told us you weren't quite as intimately involved in that testing or you know, the dissemination of the results or anything. But to your knowledge, no one else at the MTO who received the 2008 friction results had any concerns?
That is correct, and as far as I know, I never discussed the 2008 results within the ministry.
Okay. Yeah. And going back now a little bit in time, I want to ask you just a few questions about the joint MTO industry SMA task group. Am I right that there were no representatives from the City of Hamilton that were included in that task group?
That's correct for both task groups. There was the initial task group and then task group 2. That is when I joined in as sort of task. It was task group 2. We were doing similar stuff, but yeah, there was no representatives from the City of Hamilton.
Okay. Great. And then sort of related to that, I take it then that the City of Hamilton would not have been and was not in fact informed of any of the investigations or the findings of either task group 1 or task group 2.
I'm not aware of any such communications. I am aware that I'm not aware of any. I doubt that it happened. I can't speak for all the people within the ministry and in terms of the City of Hamilton. You know, I don't know which people within the ministry they have communications with and how frequently.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry, just for your awareness, you're not aware, you certainly did not, and you're not aware of anyone else from the MTO contacting the city of Hamilton with respect to the meetings or the investigations or the findings of the SMA task groups.
That's correct, and I'm not aware of any municipal outreach from that greater task group. But
okay, thank you. A slightly different topic now. And you talked yesterday about the request that was made by Dr. Uzarowski to have the friction testing done in 2007. And if I understand it correctly, your belief was that the city did not want to provide a written request for that testing. Is that right?
that's correct.
Okay. And the source of your information there was Dr. Uzarowski?
Sorry, I missed your question.
I said the source of your information there was Dr. Uzarowski.
Yes, entirely, yes.
Okay, and I take it that you didn't actually speak to anyone at the city of Hamilton and ask them directly to make a written request for that testing?
I had no discussions with anyone with the city of Hamilton at any time throughout anytime. I don't think I've ever had any contacts, but certainly in the time periods of the SMA task group and through to the testing on the Red Hill in 2007 and even 2008. I had no contact with anyone with the city. I do know Gary Moore. I've met him at technical seminars and maybe a Canadian Technical Asphalt Association, but no discussions related to the Red Hill or anything really technical that I can recall.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Raymond. Mr. Commissioner, those are all my questions.
And then Mr. Bourrier for the MTO.
Commissioner, I don't have any questions for Mr. Raymond.
So, Mr. Raymond, I think I should thank you first of all, for appearing before the inquiry yesterday and today. You're excused. There being no further questions.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Lewis, it's 11 o'clock now. Would this be an appropriate time to take a 15-minute break and then we'll start with the next witness?
Yeah, so the next witness is Tom Kazmarowski. I should ask Mr. Bourrier if he's ready. Is he ready to go after the break?
He's in the building. I was just wondering if we could maybe take a slightly longer break just to get him set up so that he's ready to go after the break.
What do you think you need?
Maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Well, why don't we return at, let's say 25 past 11.
Thank you.
Stand adjourned until then.
So, good morning, sir. I'm just going to have you affirm your evidence today. So please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good morning, Mr. Kazmarowski. Thank you for coming.
Good morning.
I'd like to first briefly go through your educational background and work history. And I understand that you were employed by the MTO from May 1976 until you retired from public service on December 31st, 2012. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you join the MTO back in 1976 straight out of university?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And your education at U of T was in, was it geological engineering?
I graduated as a out of the geological engineering program. That's correct.
Okay. And I understand that's a combination of geological and civil engineering? Is that right?
It is. It's a rather unique program at U of T.
Okay. And are you still a practicing engineer?
Yes, I am.
And we don't need to cover your whole career trajectory at the MTO, but if we could cover the last couple of positions. I understand that you were the manager of the pavement and foundations section from 1994 to March 2007. Is that right?
I believe that's correct. I don't have my resume in front of me, but I believe that's correct.
And you were the acting senior manager of MIRO, the Materials Engineering and Research Office, from April 2007 to October 2007?
That's correct.
Okay, and then you were then the manager of MIRO in a permanent capacity thereafter from November 2007 until your retirement at the end of 2012. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And I understand you're currently at Golder. Is that right?
Yes, I'm currently working part-time at Golder.
And you've been there since 2013?
I believe it was March of 2013. Yes.
And so you're part-time. And what's your role there?
Senior consultant in materials and pavement engineering, mainly doing final technical review of reports, quality control, and I get involved in some special projects.
Okay. And am I correct? Your work at Golder doesn't touch on the matters at issue in this inquiry. Is that correct?
Not at all.
And perhaps you could briefly describe your your role as the manager of pavement and foundations, particularly in the in the 2000s up to when you left that role in around March 2007, and then as the manager of MIRO until your retirement.
Yeah, as manager of pavements and foundation, I provided technical leadership and management to two distinct groups within the section. One was the pavements group, responsible for pavement design, pavement evaluation, and pavement management. And then there was the foundations group, which, and in both cases, you've got both engineers and technicians working in various positions. With the foundations group, they also had a lab component associated with it. So we had a lab group or component within the section.
Okay. And then when you were the manager of MIRO?
Basically, that's the next step up in the chain of command there. I provided basically leadership and management to 5 distinct materials areas within for the ministry, and each of those areas well, 4 of the 5 had their own laboratory.
And you were also, for a period of time, on the SMA Joint Task Group, and going from the minutes of the task group, you appear that you were on the second iteration of it, the task group 2, beginning in March 2008, and then attended a number of meetings in April 2007. March 2007 and April 2007, but then there's some not towards the end of April or the end of the year, and I note that seems to coincide with your moving into the manager of Miro role, that you no longer appear on the minutes. Was there a relationship between your promotion to the Miro manager and no longer being on the task group?
I think that was a major factor in that. The other thing is that task group was created to provide specific bituminous expertise to address a problem going on in the ministry, as you're aware, and at the time. And my background, I'm not a bituminous engineer. I never spent any time in the bituminous area, so my involvement in the proceedings was fairly limited.
Right. So, if put it that way, you're more of a rock person than a bituminous person. Is that right?
I'm more of a geotechnical background than certainly a bituminous background.
Okay.
And we're now talking about mixed design and laboratory testing of bituminous materials.
When you're talking about the SMA task group.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And we'll come back briefly. I can tell you, we've already heard quite a lot about the SMA task group and some other matters, but I do need to touch with you on a few things with you as background about MTO approaches to things, and then some specific information we've already heard from Becca Lane, who I know reported to you in a couple of different capacities, and also from Chris Raymond, who as well did at certain times. So the first thing I'd like to ask you about is we've heard that the MTO didn't have a published standard on friction performance evaluation. Do you agree with that?
That's correct.
And from your perspective, why is that?
There was internal guidelines, and I think you've heard them presented already. But
this is the number FN30.
Based on numbers above 30 and above and 30 and below, there were guidelines. Yes.
Okay.
So
the first question is, it didn't have a published standard, and then what was the MTO's use of FN30 again from your perspective?
Yeah, it was as a guideline. It was basically one of the many attributes that are looked at when you're investigating a pavement surface or condition of a pavement surface. And the friction number is one component that you look at. Basically, the guidelines said if you had numbers, and the FM number, as you're aware, is based on the ASTM brake force trailer, and the ministry operated at the posted speed when it did the testing, and typically the guidelines would be 30 and above were acceptable. From below 30 to 25 required monitoring and perhaps investigation, and then below that certainly investigation and action would be warranted.
Okay. And when you talk about the other components, what are the other components that you're looking at aside from the friction number itself?
When you're decisioning the condition of a pavement surface and its frictional performance. You're looking at the type of aggregates that are on the surface, very critical to both long and short-term frictional performance. You're looking at mix design, what type of mix design was used. You're looking at construction techniques, the quality of construction, what kind of testing was done during that. And then you have to look at all the other factors, including geometrics, environmental conditions, condition of the vehicles, driver's expectation for friction on that road. So it's quite a multidisciplinary area or attributes that you look at.
Okay. As you indicated, that the MTO conducted its skid testing using the locked wheel skid tester. My understanding is that while you were the manager of pavements and foundations, the operator of the skid tester, Frank Marciello, reported to you during that time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then once you moved into the manager Miro role, again, would continue to report to the person who was in your former position as the manager of pavements and foundations.
That's correct.
And now, when you've talked about the guidelines of FN 30, and then you also mentioned FN 25. So, what's the source of those from your long experience in the ministry? What's the source of the of that guideline?
Well, the source of the guidelines was based on the geometric design standards for highways and the minimum need for the friction component. And you have to also remember the ministry was doing friction testing on its highways for, I'm not sure when we got the first friction trailer. I'm sure it was probably the early 80s. So it was gathering information for a long time on various roadways.
Right, and when you talk about the geometric design standards, you're talking about from the MTO's design guide.
That's correct.
And it's the use of the friction coefficient to calculate stopping distances?
As I understand it, yes.
Okay. And when you say, as I understand it, it's something that's not really your area, but that's your understanding of the source. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. What about the number 25? We talked about the 30. What about the number 25? And you described it as being, don't want to mischaracterize it, but you said 30, below 30 would be to 25 requiring monitoring and perhaps investigation. And then below that, certainly investigation and action would be warranted. So the number 25 is I think something that we see less frequently in emails and so forth. What could you describe a bit about that, about the number 25 and the significance of it?
Well, all I can say is very rarely would we encounter numbers that low, for the most part. As I had indicated a bit earlier, that the roads, the provincial roads, are built with quality aggregates, quality design, and quality construction techniques, and that ensures, for the vast majority of cases, that we did not encounter any concerns regarding frictional performance. When conditions warrant, i.e. there's a concern perhaps with wet weather collisions or frequency, that's reported by the regions. Within the regions, we have pavement evaluation officers that are responsible for various sections of the road. We have maintenance personnel that are responsible for various sections of the road. If there's an indication of some concerns, as part of the evaluation, the friction trailer would be asked to go out and do some testing. But it's very rare circumstances that occurred.
Okay, and if I think what you're characterizing is essentially a sort of at the first level below 30, when you say monitoring and perhaps investigation, it's we've heard described as an investigation level. It's like, let's see whether or not there's actually an issue here resulting from after you see results that are below 30. It's like you need to look at it and see if there's an issue and perhaps do more skid testing to determine whether, in fact, the original results were borne out. Is that right?
Well, it's not just more skid testing. I think you would initiate, depending on the situation and the warrants, some other types of investigation as well, looking at the materials and doing some other tests.
It was just, I appreciate that. It was just the use of the term monitoring along with investigation. So I was wondering if by monitoring you were referring to potentially further skid testing as well as
certainly that
investigations.
Certainly that would be part of it, sure. If there is some concern, there may be a request to monitor it on an annual basis, or perhaps even more frequently if there is a significant concern.
Okay, and you talked about the people in the regions who, and as I understand it, the regions typically would bring issues if they thought there was a concern with the road potentially, then they would request the skid testing occur. Is that right?
Yes, they would, as well as other types of evaluation.
Sure. And from your perspective, we know from that skid tester, of course, it takes readings over whatever distance it's doing the testing, and it produces individual results when the wheel is locked and the readings are taken at periodic intervals, and produces an average FN from all of that, as well as low and high numbers. And we've seen those kind of graphs showing the results. From your perspective, is it the average that's looked at? Is it individual results? Is it a combination of the two in your experience?
I think you're looking at a combination of the two. Certainly the average is your starting point, and then if there's any significant deviation, you'd probably be interested in that. Of course, that would be indicative of perhaps field conditions, something that would have to be observed in the field.
And so when you refer to indicative of field conditions, you mean that there could be results which are not reliable? Is that when you say indicative of field conditions?
I mean, there's always a possibility of error in testing procedure. I think you find that in any type of testing. But I'm referring to actual conditions in the field. For example, you might be looking at a patch or multiple patches on a section of road that would give a different reading as compared to the majority of the road. There may be conditions associated with additional wear and tear. You may have, for example, an access to a quarry on that road that would certainly result in a different wear condition on the pavement surface and result in localized different numbers. So it's all, you really have to go out and take a look at the road. The FM number by itself is not particularly helpful from that point of view.
Right. It's an indicator of where you need to look at something and to determine if there really is an issue. It's
an indicator. It's one of the attributes. I can give you an analogy, but I don't know if that's appropriate or not.
You certainly can. Sometimes it's good for lay people to hear an analogy.
Well, I related to prostate cancer and doing a PSA test. The PSA test is an indicator. It's not the absolute result, but it's an indicator.
And could you describe what the MTO's approach was to sharing its use and practices with respect to the guideline that you've described?
Mainly, when you say sharing, I assume
externally.
Externally, very little. There was very little external use of that information. I think you have to realize, well, You should realize that there was only the one device and only the one technician who operated the device. And I believe it may have been one of the only devices, certainly going back now, more during my involvement with the ministry, one of the only devices in Canada. I think that Transport Canada may have had one for the airfields. I'm not aware of any other provincial agency that offered, but I could be, I stand to be corrected. More so.
No, go ahead.
More so, I think you would see state agencies down in the States using them, the state DOTs. I think it was far more common for them.
And I realize in your answer to your question that my question that I phrased it wrongly, because I think you took it as being, this is my fault. I think you took it as meaning actually sharing the use of the machine, actually letting third parties use the machine or testing for third parties. Is that what you took my question as meaning?
No, not so much as if people aren't familiar with the device, there isn't much point in sharing the data, the individual data. I think what you would see typically shown is interpretation of the data, from and the overall assessment of the pavement surface. Okay, so what I'm wondering is specifically with the use of the MTO's use of FN30 as a guideline. Am I correct as understanding that it was not the MTO's practice to communicate that number to third parties? Is that fair? I think that's a fair assessment, and it had to do more with, as I said, people not being familiar with the device. And if we could go to, just to give a specific example of it, overview document 4, registrar, image 126. You're probably aware of this, Mr. Kaczmarowski, but this is our overview document that we have, which summarizes evidence and describes and excerpts from various documents over time. If at any point I take you to this and you want to see the underlying document instead, you just let me know and we can do that, okay? And so looking at paragraph 305, it's referring to a media inquiry in 2011. And this, I just raising this as an example of the approach to sharing information. And the media inquiry is about the QEW and the use of SMA generally, skid resistance, and the pause on use of SMA from a gentleman at the Equipment Journal. And so he was asking for information on this. And you write, I'm concerned with these types of media conversations regarding frictional resistance and safety of our highway surfaces. I would prefer we avoid any discussion of actual skid numbers /values /thresholds and keep the conversation on a more generic level. The sensitivity associated with this issue is high. And is this consistent with the general approach that we were just discussing? I personally feel, I feel that that's more reflects the ministry's perspective with regards to discussions on frictional resistance. Okay, and in the last sentence, the sensitivity associated with this issue is high. Is there a specific issue that you're talking about, or is it generally about skid numbers? Well, I think when we look at sensitivity associated with this issue is high, it's very easy to misinterpret the data, especially if you're not knowledgeable. And if you throw out a few numbers, it's very easy to go down the wrong rabbit hole with that. If you look at the actual, I think the query made in this case, if you look at the questions, I don't believe that they were fairly general or vague in nature. And concern, well, as I mentioned here, this would be the response that you would expect. These type of responses always go up the chain of command.
Yeah.
And get addressed. And over the years, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, that's fine. I'm done.
Okay, I think it would be worthwhile to take you to the specific email. It's registrar. It's MTO 26567. And you could pull up. Well, you see at the bottom there, June 16, 2011, Mr. Metcalf is writing to Anil Varani, and he introduces himself and is talking about SMA being applied to the QEW, and then he lists questions below, and then that results in your the email of yours above, which we just discussed. If you go to the next image, registrar, it sets out his questions. And can you read that all right, or could we blow that up?
No, I think it's pretty good.
Okay. And so, he asks a number of questions, about SMA for the most part, and, including life expectancy and so forth, and about gridding, which we know that is one thing at that point in time the joint SMA task group was looking at as one of the solutions to the early age SMA problem. But then he says in the fourth last paragraph, what reference number does asphalt have to meet or exceed in order to be used in Ontario highways? And then at the end, he talks about, in the last paragraph, the way in which resistance is measured is through use of a skid test. That he got this from an interview with someone else. So he is asking. You're right. He's not stating specifically. We know that you use this number FN30 and asking a question of that. But he's asking generally what's the reference that you use for asphalt, and makes reference to the skid testing machine. And so then your response is, as you said, as we've looked at, that you want to prefer to avoid any discussion of actual skid numbers. And then my question was about the sensitivity, and I'm wondering if the sensitivity was specific to the skid numbers, or if it was related to the early age SMA issue that you were dealing with at that time, or a combination.
Yeah, I would think. What's the date on this, by the way?
This is 2011, June 16, 2011.
Okay, yeah, and so this is after the moratorium is being, or the hold on SMA was in place, if I'm not mistaken.
It was still in place at that time, yeah, but there was still, and there were many, as we've heard, there were efforts being taken, investigations to determine the best way to deal with the early age issue.
Yeah, and so I think you're correct in questioning whether, or asking me whether it was a combination of both, and it probably was a combination of both. But again, these questions, what reference number does asphalt have to meet or exceed in order to be used on Ontario highways? I'm not sure what that's referring to. Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, clearly that you since the question is about the early age low friction is part of this request, right?
At the end, it raises the issue about the skid test.
Yeah, and then you in your email to Mr. Raymond talk about specifically not to avoid discussion of actual skid numbers, values, and thresholds, and keep it on a more generic level. So you seem to have appreciated the request as being looking for, or at least one that could give rise to answers relating to the FN30 that we're just talking about. All right.
I don't know if it's reflecting FN 30. I think my response is that you know, we didn't want to, I didn't see the need to get into the weeds in responding to this. And by the weeds, I mean the you know, the details. It's I see that as being somewhat you know, more of a overview request, and the response, I believe, was in that vein.
Okay, and if I understood you correctly, your point is that given the nature of the request, it is a nuanced issue. It isn't just a number, and there are all the other factors and considerations that you need to look at when you're evaluating a friction test results. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay. You can take that down, Registrar. Thank you. I don't want to spend much time on it, but we have heard from Ms. Lane and Mr. Raymond, and there's quite a lot in the overview document about a debate that went over years on the use of using friction numbers in lieu of or in addition to the designated source of materials pre-approved list of aggregates in paving contracts. And, you know, it went on for years from the documents, apparently at least 2005 to 2015, including after you left the MTO. And of course, we're aware that, you know, historically and up to the present, the MTO has managed in part pavement friction by pre-qualifying aggregates for use in surface courses via the designated source materials list. And so I just want, from your perspective up to your departure, to describe the issue as you understood it between using performance-based contracts, including friction numbers for warranty and so forth, versus the use of the DSM in ensuring good friction on highways. Just if you could give us your view of that debate, perhaps.
You're certainly correct in stating that this discussion went on for several years. A little bit of context: the ministry was trying to re-engineer itself to try and cut down on costs associated with construction, to try and encourage innovation by contractors, and you know, and the costs associated with construction are not just the material costs and placement costs, but it's the oversight costs, the testing costs associated with the use of the materials to make sure you get the right materials, you know, the materials that are associated with the designated sources of materials list, all the oversight costs, the man hours involved in that, etc. And one of the proposed solutions as we move towards a performance-based type of contract was to eliminate all the requirements for materials, the long-term performance of these materials, you know, the testing requirements, etc., and just go with a friction number. That was proposed by certain groups within the ministry. It led to a lot of discussion, and this had to do with the introduction of, I think, 3 different types of warranty contracts: performance-based contracts, minnow contracts, 7-year warranty contracts. And there was also the idea of these area term contracts. And I know in the minnow contracts and the 7-year warranty contracts, I believe there were several contracts that were awarded based on that. So what my perspective is, being a materials engineer and a pavements engineer who is looking for long-term performance, quality pavement, I certainly was not in favor of moving to basically trashing all the material specifications and just saying that a friction number will solve all your problems.
Okay. And in the contracts that at least in some of them that were that did include a friction number, am I correct that the FN30 was the number that was used?
I believe FN30 was used as a failure criteria on these roads, keeping in mind that the measurement was done by the ministry. And again, it's a question of could the ministry even be able to go out and measure on these jobs that are accumulating and providing that data, considering there was only one device and one technician who was operating the device.
Right, as you let more of these contracts out, then the obligation to test to ensure the warranty or the failure criteria is not been fallen below is then going to fall on the operator of the skid tester. Is that right?
If you don't test at an appropriate time, as in any specification, if you don't enforce the specification, then you know you're a victim of the results.
Okay, so I want to move on earlier in time to when you were the manager of pavements and foundations, or the head of pavements and foundations, which was discussed from 1994 to March 2007. And am I correct during that time period that requests for the use of the skid trailer and testing by Mr. Marciello would come through you and had to be authorized by you? Is that right?
No, that's not quite correct. The request did not necessarily come directly to me. They may have gone to the senior engineer in the section. They may have gone to Frank. They were all added to a work plan. That work plan would, I would certainly have an opportunity to look at that work plan, but it included input from various sections within Muro, from other head office sections, as well as you know, from the regions. The majority of work also comes from the regions. So yeah, it did not come directly to me, and then I would pass on to Frank. No.
Okay, so we know that requests would come in from the soils and aggregates section for DSM application and maintenance testing purposes. Is that right? That's one source?
Yes, that's definitely a source.
Okay, and as you said, the regions, if they had pavements that they wanted to be tested for whatever the reason was, that would be the other major source. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then, as I understand it, if non-MTO sources, non-MTO parties had a request, that it would come in through whoever their contact was, but ultimately would have to be approved by as part of the work plan, or at least approved by the head of pavements. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to realize that it was the regions that were predominantly dealing with the municipalities.
Right.
We had no direct role with the municipalities. When I say we, I'm talking about the section, the pavements and foundation section. So the requests would probably come in through the regions. What we did also get occasionally, and they could come through the regions, or occasionally they came directly in, were enforcement issues that the OPP would like to have a section of road tested. So,
right. Okay.
Those were few and far between.
Right. And is it fair to say generally third party, meaning non-MTO requests, whichever they were, whether municipality, police, and so forth, those were generally not frequent? Is that right?
Not frequent. That's correct.
Okay. So if we could go to and register, this is overview document 3, not 4, 3, image 12 and 13. And it's, you'll see paragraph 19 at the bottom of the left-hand image there, and then the subparagraphs on the top of the right-hand image. And this is in October 1999, Hamilton placed SMA on Burlington Street between Victoria Avenue and Wellington Street in Hamilton. And then there's a 2002 CTAA paper, which Gary Moore of the city, as it indicates there, the city of Hamilton was one of the 3 authors listed as the 3rd author in it. It stated, look at paragraph A, it was to evaluate, the purpose of it was to evaluate the use of SMA to mitigate rutting in high traffic areas and to assess the potential of SMA for use on a proposed multi-lane expressway. And then B, the MTO performed skid resistance testing on this SMA placement using its ASTM E274 brake force unit containing average measurements by lane between FN 44 and FN 51 in November 99 and May 2000. And if we could go then, Registrar, to the paper itself, this is at GOL 1567. So there's the usual CTAA front of their proceedings for their annual conference. You're probably familiar with that look, as I've gathered from people within the, the industry. If you go to the second image, I'm not sure if it's the second or third. Yeah, so this is in Calgary, Alberta, and then the third image is the article itself, paper itself. And you know, if you could go back to the prior image, please. Thank you. And if you could call out the acknowledgements. You'll see the authors are Paul Anderson and Keith McInnes, sorry, along with Mr. Moore. And then in the acknowledgements, it lists a number of people the authors wish to express their thanks to. And in the second last line, it says, and Tom Kazmarowski, MTO, for the pavement friction surveys conducted on the Burlington Street SMA site. You can take the, yeah, down. Yeah, sorry, the other authors being Paul Anderson of Landtech and Keith McInnes at Canadian Asphalt Industries. So you were the manager, head of pavements and foundations at that time, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you have any recollection of this project, of this testing taking place?
Well, I didn't until I saw the paper.
Okay. So you can read the paper and see that it happened.
The paper and I saw that it happened. That's correct. No, but I think what I'm referring to more is the fact that Paul Anderson was the principal author of this paper.
Yes.
I was, just as a bit of background, I was chair of the Ontario Provincial Standards Pavements Committee for, I believe it was over 20 years. And the OPS Pavements Committee was a committee responsible for developing and revising, updating specifications and standards in the province of Ontario for, in my case, pavements and the use of materials, etc. As I said, I was there, I believe I chaired it for 23 years, if I'm not mistaken. Paul Anderson was the consultant representative on that committee. Typically on that committee, you would have representatives from the ministry, myself. You'd have a representative from the Consulting Engineers of Ontario. You'd have 3 representatives from municipal, you'd have 3 representatives from the Municipal Engineering Association. And Oh, and a contractor, of course. How could I miss a contractor? And Paul Anderson was probably the member of that committee who was on there almost as long as I was, quite a while. So I knew Paul quite well. Paul knew our capabilities within the ministry and the fact that we did do skid testing. Obviously, over the years, we'd have some discussions and issues. And I surmise, I believe the situation was that he would have approached me and said that we're doing we're using this new material, this stone mastic asphalt on this road in Hamilton. We would very much like to get some skid data on it. I see they did, I think British pendulum testing, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was the next bullet point below.
They did do that as well.
Yeah, so they did that, and I would imagine he was wondering if we would be able to do that testing, and I would, because this is a job that would have interested us. It's new material, new development. We're always trying to increase our database of performance results. So this would have been of interest to the ministry, and I would have taken that up the chain of command to get approval to have the testing done, and provided that to Paul, and in this case the city. But I did not have any, to the best of my knowledge, any communication with the city on this.
Okay, so a few things there. I think you said I surmise and I would have and so forth. So is this a recollection that you have that you can now, having seen this article, looking back and saying, yes, I recall doing that? Or is this what, given the relationship you had with Mr. Anderson and the MTO's interest in new technologies at the time, that you surmise or you believe would have been the line of communication and how this arose?
I would go with your second option there.
Okay.
I think it's important to realize that being cited in a paper, I've probably been cited in many papers. I've co-authored or authored in excess of 100 papers myself over my career. And I would have trouble recalling many of the papers that I have authored or co-authored.
So I think your comment is aimed at, if you have trouble remembering the papers that you authored, you would have more trouble remembering papers that you're acknowledged in?
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
And if we could go to image 9. Okay, so after, I think on the preceding page, setting out some of the results, if you could then highlight the top of the left-hand page, the three lines of text there. Yeah. And this is where it states, after talking about British pendulum numbers, and it says, however, skid trailer friction numbers at 50 kilometers per hour of 45 to 51 are regarded by the MTO to be consistent with mixes having excellent skid resistance properties. And is that, do you think that's likely that this is a view that you would have expressed to Mr. Anderson, and that he then reflected in the paper?
I have difficulty using words like excellent. It just seems a bit over the top. But I probably would have said that the numbers were very good. They were acceptable, etc. Okay,
so you think it fair to say that if you were evaluating friction numbers as a general practice, you would be reticent to use that term excellent in any circumstance? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I hesitate using that frequently.
Just generally speaking.
Yes.
Okay. That is fair to characterize as a sort of a conservative engineering approach when expressing your views?
Yeah, I mean, when I review papers, I have difficulty giving a paper a 10 out of 10. I think that's I mean, there are times that I do it, but it has to be worthy.
Okay.
So a conservative approach is correct, yes.
All right. And it's testing at 50 kilometers an hour, and we appreciate that the testing speed has an effect. The faster you go, the lower the friction number obtained tends to be. But would you, today, would you characterize 45 to 51 at 50 kilometers an hour obtained by the MTO skid tester as being excellent or simply adequate?
Well, I should say I haven't been in the interpretation business of friction data for well over 10 years now.
Yeah.
So
I'm talking about at the time while you were working there. You have all of your experience to draw.
I would certainly classify it as being acceptable, yes.
Okay. And it's certainly well above FN 30, right?
It's above FM 30, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And did I understand you correctly to say that you do not think that you would have had direct communications with yourself with the City of Hamilton about the skid testing results? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I don't believe I had any discussion with the City of Hamilton regarding this project.
And just to close that off, why do you have a level of certainty on that point when not having a specific recollection of where you likely obtained, where the request likely came from and so forth?
I just, when you say the City of Hamilton, I assume you're talking about the author on this paper?
Most likely, yes. It could be anyone, but Gary Moore was the author, and we've heard from him that he was certainly the lead on this project.
Right. Yeah, I think I have no recollection at all of ever talking to Gary Moore about this.
Okay. And did you know Gary Moore?
No, I don't. No, unless I met him at a symposium or a conference or some workshop or something. But
right, but no more than in passing.
No, yes, I have no formal, to the best of my knowledge, I have had no formal communication with Mr. Moore.
Okay. You can take that down, please. Thank you. And the paper as well. And just in terms of the MTO's interest, we've heard that by that point in time, SMA had been placed by the MTO on the 401 in a trial near Milton. Do you recall that?
I believe that's one of the first jobs that was carried out using SMA.
Okay. And we heard a bit from Ms. Lane about it. If we could go back to overview document 4, images 21 and 22, please. And you'll see at paragraph 43 at the bottom of the left-hand image, this is now in 2006, and you're sending an email to Mr. Cotillo, Mr. Tam, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Billings, and Ms. Lane, all internal at the MTO, respecting a 10 years comparative friction testing, SMA versus DFC, Highway 401 contract 96-50 Milton, and attaching the test results, and you just indicating that here's the results from 10 years of friction testing, and that there appears to be no advantage to the SMA surface compared, I think, to the dense friction course over the 10-year period. Do you recall this?
Seeing that it's in writing in front of me, I don't specifically recall it, but I accept that it's correct.
Okay, and I just again, just to coming back to the Burlington Street project, is that one of the reasons you had this ongoing, you had this placement in 1996 that was being evaluated going forward from a comparative basis? Is that perhaps one of the reasons why you were interested at that point, that the MTO was interested at that point in the Burlington Street SMA project?
Well, as I said, the use of SMA was in its infancy, and we're very interested in gathering data on its performance in Ontario. It's always an issue when you see performance results from other states, other countries, even other provinces, but it's not the same environment as we have in Ontario. So, in the same traffic conditions, etc. So, we're always interested in gathering information on performance in Ontario.
Now then, to move specifically to the Red Hill Valley Parkway, and you can, we'll actually, leave the overview document up, Registrar. We'll come back to it shortly. Do you recall in spring of 2007, and I'll take you to some of the documents, but do you recall offering skid testing to the city of Hamilton, or having discussions with the city of Hamilton, specifically Gary Moore, but potentially anyone else, in spring of 2007?
Not at all. I do not recall having that discussion with the city of Hamilton or any of the city of Hamilton's representatives.
Okay. So if we could go to image 41. And I think it'd be worthwhile to go to the email itself, but in this paragraph 86 in the overview document, it's indicating that on, just to place it, May 10th, 2007, Mr. Politano, so that's Lou Politano of the MTO, you're familiar with him, of course, advised Mr. Is it Chaput or Chaput?
Chaput.
Chaput. So Jerry Chaput, that Hamilton was using a perpetual pavement design for the Red Hill, that Hamilton was planning on instrumenting and monitoring pavement performance, that Hamilton had asked for and whether the MTO would be interested in participating financially, and the total cost, and that OMPA, the Ontario Hot Mix Producers Association, was contributing $10,000. And then there's an email exchange between the three of you about that. And then in the course of that, you indicated, I have already offered to do skid testing on the SMA surface of Red Hill Creek perpetual pavement. And I think it'd be worthwhile to go to the email, because there's more to your email. So I think in fairness, we should look at the whole thing. And Registrar, this is MTO 56. So this is the first image, and there's further discussions with, on May 10th, and Ms. Lane has brought into it. So if we could go to images 2 and 3, please. And the email I just read to you is the one at the bottom of the left-hand image. And I think it's really the first paragraph. The rest of it seems to be on a different issue, and you say it's on another note. So if we could just expand the first paragraph of the email at the bottom. Yeah. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. So the first sentence is what we excerpted in the overview document, but then you indicate we can also provide annual ARAN monitoring of surface conditions. This would be considered services in kind, no additional costs, and provide both the city and ourselves with valuable performance data. So you indicated you don't have any recollection of any discussions with the city about this. So can you tell us what this is talking about in that case?
Yeah, certainly. I believe it reflects internal. I believe this is an internal discussion, and it reflects discussion that I would have had with Jerry regarding this this request for monitoring and testing our instrumentation funding. Keeping in mind that funds for this type of project, this associate project, if you want to call that, are very limited, and Jerry has a specific pot for it, and whatever he loses from one, he can't provide for another project. So we would have been pursuing, and it always comes up, is there anything else we can do rather than providing money, even though it's only $10,000? Is there anything else that we can do? And I believe I would have offered to Jerry that we could do skid testing out there because it is an SMA job, and we would be interested in the results. So I think that's basically what I'm referring to.
Okay, and the Jerry is Jerry Chaput, who is the one
that's correct. Jerry Chaput, right, who I believe is director at that time.
And then registrar, if we go to overview document 4, image 43. And so image, paragraph 90. Yeah, you can expand that. Thank you. And so on May 15th, this is 5 days later, Gary Moore from Hamilton forwarded Lou Politano of the MTO a proposal from Dr. Uzorowski to install the pavement monitoring instrumentation on the Red Hill. And then in his May 15th email forwarding Mr. Gary Moore's email and the Golder proposal, Mr. Politano stated, I spoke with Gary, parentheses, Hamilton, advised him we are interested in participating in this initiative, but I did not give him a dollar number. You had previously suggested a 10K MTO contribution toward this. Please review this proposal and confirm that the $10,000 is still appropriate or whether it should move up or down, and be prepared to discuss our contribution with Hamilton. I will respond to Gary and ask him to contact Tom directly to discuss this further. It appears that Gary is away for the rest of this week. And do you, he says at the end he'll respond to Gary and ask him to contact Tom directly. Is that you?
I don't know. I can assume. It's hard to say.
Okay. And you don't have any specific recollection though, other than this email. Is that right?
None whatsoever. I don't. To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe that Gary Moore ever contact or attempted to contact me.
Okay. And maybe we could go to the email itself. It's MTO 20408. And yeah, just the top email. There's the whole thing on May 15th from Lou, and he sends it to Jerry Chaput and to you, copying Roger Hanmer at the MTO as well. And so I think looking at that, since he sent it to you, the Tom must be you in that instance. Is that fair?
That's correct. It's always an issue when you just pull out a segment of something and there's no reference to it. But in this case, definitely yes.
Yeah, no, I understand from the reference before. That's why I took you to it specifically. So in any event, am I correct that you don't have any recollection of Mr. Moore contacting you or you contacting him about this issue? Is that right?
None whatsoever, no.
Okay. And did you ever visit the Red Hill Valley Parkway, or during construction or thereafter?
No, I think I had mentioned in our previous interview that that the time I've driven the Red Hill Parkway was more recently. When more recently, I'm referring to within the last perhaps 3 or 4 years, where I got detoured off the QEW and I had to go up the Red Hill and across on the Link and then back down on 403.
It's probably the MTO requiring the detour.
Actually, I think because of, for whatever reason, the Burlington Skyway was out, so
okay.
There was a lot of traffic going up Red Hill Creek.
You can take that down, Registrar. Thank you. Okay, then jumping forward to September 2007, Registrar, if we could go to overview document 4, image 52 and 53. And so this is on September 27th and 28th, 2007. And there's emails between Mr. Raymond and Ms. Lane, and then looping you in about a request from Ludimir Uzorowski of Golder for skid testing, friction testing on the Red Hill. And that the city of Hamilton has not made a request. And at paragraph 118 in the middle of the left-hand image, Ms. Lane forwards Mr. Raymond's email to you and asked, "Hi, Tom, I seem to remember we offered some monitoring of the Red Hill Creek Expressway perpetual pavement. Did that not include friction testing?" And you respond in 119, "Yes, but we should have Ludimir instruct the city to either request the testing or at least approve Ludimir's request for testing and give permission for us to test on their facility." And I mean that you're responding yes to her question about previously the monitoring having been offered that included friction testing, and you're responding affirmatively to that. So do you know what you were talking about at that time?
Yeah, I assume I'm referring to the internal discussions that we had, that I had offered to do friction testing on that facility in response to I guess the conversation between Lupolitano and the city of Hamilton for that instrumentation program.
Okay. And there is discussion about reticence apparently on the part of the city to make a request directly to the MTO, and so forth. And you indicate in 119 that you should have Ludimir instruct the city to either request the testing or at least approve Ludimir's request for testing and give permission to test on their facility. What was your reasoning for that? wanting that to happen?
I think it's just, from my perspective, I felt it was fairly obvious that if we're going to test on some other owner's property, that we should get approval to do that testing. This is not something we do very frequently, and I thought that would be a very logical request.
Sorry, what's not being done very frequently is the testing on someone else's property. It's typically done on MTO roads, right?
Exactly. Yes.
All right, and we know that the MTO did conduct the Red Hill skid testing on October 16th, 2007. And if you could jump forward, Registrar, to image 80 of overview document 4. And this is on December 13, sorry, it's paragraph 183 there. On December 13, 2007, Ms. Lane emailed the RHVP October 16, 2007 friction test results to Mr. Kazmarowski with the subject line, friction results on demix aggregate in SMA and Hamilton, and stating and setting out the average, or the sort of the bottom line that says FN 90 equals 34, min equals 28, and max equals 37. And then you replied in 184, not great results, but still consistently acceptable even at 90 kph. Have you shared these results with our MTO task group members? And so just to frame it, at this point in late 2007, you're the manager of Miro, right?
That's correct.
And Ms. Lane is the head of pavements and foundations, occupying your prior position.
That's correct.
Okay. And I think, as we discussed earlier, you were not involved in the SMA task group yourself at that point. You weren't part of the task group.
I had been removed and replaced.
Right. And do you recall if you reviewed the actual results attached to her email, or was your response based on the sort of the bottom line that she sent? Do you know?
I would probably, I mean, I can't recollect specifically, but I certainly would think that I would have reviewed the results, the detailed results. I would not just look at her 3 numbers there and make a statement like that.
I guess, and you said still consistently acceptable. That's likely not something that you would say with, unless you could see what the consistency was. Is that fair?
Exactly.
Okay. And do you know why you were receiving those at the time? Do you recall?
Well, I thought that Becca is just closing the loop, seeing that my involvement was, earlier that year, although limited. I had some involvement, and she was just closing the loop and providing me with additional, the sort of the results of that. Although, to keep in mind, I believe this happened 2 months after the actual test results became
That's right.
available.
They were, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
And this, just to place it in time, it followed an application for inclusion on the DSM by the aggregate producer in time. And if we could go to the next 2 images. Oh, actually, no, sorry, that's wrong. I should look at the results themselves. Give me one moment. Okay, images 61 and 62, please. And if you could expand both of them like you did before. Thank you. So if you could just describe having, and if you need to take a minute to look at it, please do. But if not, describe how you arrived at your view as expressed in your email to Ms. Lane.
Okay, so these are the actual test. This is the actual test details that was carried out on October 16th. The one on the left is a southbound lane 1. The one on the right is southbound lane 2. If you go down the chart, you can see the total distance that was covered, the speed that it was done at, approximately around 90 kilometers per hour. I think the average speed is 91.9. And then the average friction numbers for each of the tests. And then you see landmark issues associated with where the test was done. And similar for the right side. So the average the average FN is 33.9 in the southbound lane 1 and 33.8 in southbound lane 2. You get a minimum value, a maximum value, standard deviation, and then the number of tests that were done in the field. I believe that shows 20 on the left side and 23 on the right side, if I'm not mistaken. And you're asking me what led me to my my conclusion that it's consistently acceptable is the numbers as shown for the most part.
Yeah, you said not great results, but still consistently acceptable even at 90 kilometers.
Right, right. And by not great results, you know, if I were to say they were great results, I would be expecting numbers in the high 40s, I guess. That's not the case here, but the numbers are acceptable, and there's a fairly uniform distribution throughout all the numbers there. There are a couple of inconsistencies, outliers, if you want to call them. 28.7, 28.1 on the, did I miss one? On the southbound lane 1 and on southbound lane 2. 29.6, 28.4, 28.6, 29.7. But overall, I have no concern with these results.
Okay. And you were aware, of course, that it was SMA and that it was newly placed SMA, right?
Yes, I was, yes.
Yeah, and that's why you asked if Ms. Lane had provided it to the task group members, presumably.
Yes, I mean, the whole intention here was to add that to our database of information.
Okay, and at the time, there was quite a bit going on with respect to the MTO's roads and SMA placements as well. And if I could take you to, if you take those down, Registrar, to overview document 4, image 58. And actually 58 and 59. And right around the same time that the Red Hill testing had taken place in October, there was also skid testing done by Mr. Marciello on Highway 401 near Woodstock in contract 2005-3030. And this is an email from Mr. Raymond on October 16th about low friction on Highway 401 at Woodstock contract 2005-3030. To Mr. Tam, Ms. Lane, Mr. Rogers, and you. And if you need to take a moment to review that, please do so. But if you've already done, let me know.
Yes, I have looked at this document prior.
Okay, and do you recall the issue from around that point about the 401 results?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And when you're looking at the Red Hill results, is there are you comparing it to the results the same that you're getting from the MTO's SMA placements?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure the timing between the two documents, but
well, this is sorry. I'll tell you, this is October 16th, and you get it the Red Hill results on December 13th. So as you pointed out, it was a couple months later.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. This caused quite a commotion internally because of this task group had been working on trying to address some of the early friction performance issues associated with SMA. They specifically put together this contract to try using different aggregates and blending aggregates, as I recall, to try and come up with a product that will address this early age friction. And lo and behold, the numbers were surprisingly low. I believe, and I'm just going by memory here, I think in one lane that was not open to traffic that Frank couldn't test, I think there were numbers below 20, if I'm not mistaken. So
on this particular project?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
I stand to be corrected, but I know the numbers were surprisingly low, particularly on a 401 freeway facility. So.
And we've heard, and we're aware that the pause that was placed on use of SMA was imposed in early November 2007. So in between the testing both of this 401 stretch and the Red Hill, and then you receiving the Red Hill results in December. And so from your perspective, and you're the head of Miro at the time, you were of course aware of and involved in the decisions about the SMA pause. Is that fair?
I would think, to be fair, the recommendation came out of the task group. The task group had been working on this for some time. They now have the results. And their recommendation up to senior management, who would either accept or perhaps modify or reject the recommendations or some of the components of the recommendation. It came up through me because I am the manager. I was the manager of Miro at the time, but this was a decision recommendations through the task force.
Right. I appreciate it didn't originate with you, but you were, given your position, you were aware of it and involved in it. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And one clarification I'd like to make here is the fact that we're talking about aggregates that are off the designated sources of materials list for aggregates, whereas the Red Hill Valley Expressway, the aggregates used on that were not on the designated sources of materials list.
Right. Is that something you were aware of at the time? Do you recall?
Good question. I don't know. I can't answer.
Right. Okay, so given your involvement in the, heard what you said about the where it percolated up from and made the final decision about the pause, but was the MTO's pause on SMA related in any way to the skid test results taken from the Red Hill Valley Parkway?
Not at all. Had nothing to do with the Red Hill Valley Parkway.
And did you have a sense prior to the pause being implemented in 2007, when of course it became broadly known in the industry because there was a pause on its use, about how widely known the early age low friction issue was in the industry, beyond the task group and those within the MTO that were involved?
I think most of the general information with regards to that would have probably come out through the members of the task group. So you had contractors and I believe consultants on that task group, and that information probably would have been disseminated. I'm not sure of the timing, whether there was any public statements made at the time. I don't think so. I think that would have come out at presentations to the Ontario Road Builders and to UMPA, which would have attracted some media attention, I think.
Once the pause was implemented, you mean? The
Yes.
last part of what you said? Yeah.
That's correct.
And we know that the MTO conducted further skid testing in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2014 at the request of the Soils and Aggregates section in relation to the application for DSM listing by DeMix Aggregates, which is what was used on the Red Hill surface course, SMA. We're appreciating you left at the end of 2012, but were you aware of that testing being done at the time?
No, I was not.
And generally speaking, given your role, is that surprising, or is that what you would expect given your position as Miro senior manager?
I think it's what you would expect. There's, all the sections are responsible for their portions of delivery, their services, and certainly I don't see all the different projects that are going on. It's a very busy time, all kinds of different initiatives going on, and that would be one very small component. Getting testing for the designated sources of materials list is fairly routine. Certainly not something that would initiate some ringing of bells or raising of red flags.
Well, we've seen, I'm going to take you to it, but during that time period, there were requests by memo made specifically from Soils and Aggregates to the head of pavements and foundations for for friction testing in each year. So that's typically be made. That's where the request would go to specifically. Is that consistent with how it was done when you were in the head of pavements and foundations role?
It would, the overall request would be going there and added to the work plan for the brake force trailer. Yes.
Okay. Nevertheless, of not being aware, is there of the testing occurring, would you have expected in your role that Hamilton or its representatives would be advised of the testing that was being done by at the request of Soils and Aggregates, or for whatever purpose?
Could you repeat that question, please?
I badly phrased it. So you accepting that you weren't aware that the testing was occurring, but nevertheless, would you have expected that the MTO would advise the city of Hamilton of the subsequent testing being done on the Red Hill?
I would think that somebody would have advised the city of Hamilton. Keep in mind that this was an initiative that was brought forward by the the operators of the quarry, the owners of the quarry. They're the ones that proposed to use this test section. It would seem that if they're proposing to use a test section that's on a City of Hamilton road, that they may have gotten permission to do that. But I don't know the background.
Right. So to unpack it, that would be, it's your expectation, but you'd actually don't know whether or not that was the case, one way or the other.
I do not know if that was the case or not. There's a set routine for this. This certainly, being a test section on an existing road, is not the norm.
Right.
But yeah, it's how it ended up working out. I assume, I don't know, was there a request made to the city that the test being done? I'm not aware of it.
Right. Okay. Well, that's all I'm asking is your awareness. Thank you. Commissioner, I do not have any further questions. It is 3 minutes to 1, which is our usual lunch break. I don't know what participants council, what time they want. I'm wondering your direction. We can either just have that discussion and come back after lunch, or we could have a discussion if you wanted to, and to push through, depending on the length of time participants council want.
Why don't we adjourn for 5 minutes, have you and participants council move to a breakout room where you can get that information, and then come back and advise us.
Great, thank you. We'll do that. Registrar, if you could send us to the breakout room, please, and Mr. Kazmarowski will be back shortly. We're back from break. Commissioner, I can advise that there's just some short questions from council for the city and council from the MTO, not from the other participants.
Fine.
So first it would be Mr. Chen for the city.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner and Mr. Kazmarowski. As we indicated before, I will not be keeping you too long from lunch, just a couple of minutes. In your evidence today, you testified about the 2007 friction testing results, and I understand your view was that those test results were acceptable and not concerning. Is that right?
That's correct.
To your knowledge, no one else at the MTO who received those 2007 results had any concerns, either safety or otherwise. Is that fair?
To the best of my knowledge, that's correct.
Okay. And I take it that at the MTO, the Ministry of Transportation, if someone had developed a safety concern after conducting the friction testing, for a municipality, you would expect that concern to be raised internally to the appropriate person or team at the MTO?
If there was a concern that was raised, yes, it would have been brought forward. I believe that's correct. Okay.
And similarly, if someone at the MTO had a concern with the friction testing results, you would expect that the concern would also be communicated to the municipality. Is that fair?
I guess it's a bit of an open question. I don't want to hedge it my response. I guess it depends on what service was requested. I'm not quite, did you want to rephrase your question?
Yeah, no, it's similar to the one I asked before, where if there was a safety concern that was formed after performing friction testing for the municipality. And my earlier question was, you would expect that the concern would be raised firstly, internally. And so my next question is, would the concern also then be communicated to the municipality or the third party who had requested the friction testing?
Yes, if it's a valid concern.
Right. Okay. And you're not aware of the MTO having a policy that says, if someone at the MTO knows about a safety concern from testing, to then not to disclose it to the appropriate entity or representative of that entity?
Not aware of any policy such as that.
You also had a brief discussion with Mr. Lewis about whether the city of Hamilton had requested friction testing in 2007, or at least whether they approved it. You remember that?
Yes, I recall that conversation. Yeah.
And I won't bring the email. I won't ask for the email to be brought up unless you need it. I'm hoping you don't. I take it that what is ultimately important in that context is that if friction testing is to take place on the Red Hill Valley Parkway, the city should at least approve it because they are the owner of the road. Is that fair?
I think that would be a fair assumption, yes.
Okay. And beyond just getting permission from the city, in that case, the city would then also have notice that the testing is taking place. Is that fair?
I guess so, yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Well,
are we referring to the same testing here, the testing that was done at? Yes.
Yeah, I'm referring to the same testing, and that getting
the initial skid testing.
Yeah, correct. Right. And my final question is, if the MTO doesn't provide notice to the city, that testing is taking place, and so this is kind of moving into the context of the testing that happens subsequently. If the MTO doesn't provide notice to the city that testing is taking place, the city realistically could not know that the friction testing was taking place, right?
I guess what your logic is, if they don't know about it, then they don't know about it. Yeah. Okay, was there a question there?
Well, no, it was more to get your see if you were if you agree with that statement. My logic could be flawed, but I think we're in agreement that it's not. Is that fair?
I think it's fair. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Bourrier for the MTO.
Hello, Mr. Kazmarowski. I have a few follow-up questions to the discussion that you had with Mr. Lewis this morning about the MTO's use of FN30. Do you remember that discussion with him?
Yes, I do.
If you have friction testing numbers that are over 30, is it fair to say that indicates that friction is not likely an issue on a particular roadway?
Not necessarily. It's an indication, but again, you have to look at all the other attributes and issues that are associated with it. If somebody asks for friction testing on a facility that they have a concern with or identified an issue and the friction testing comes above 30, that doesn't mean that necessarily it's correct. Similar to the fact that if the numbers are below 30 doesn't mean that it's suddenly a friction issue. It's all dependent on the other attributes, what exactly is going on out there. It could be a geometric problem. It could be, all kinds of issues.
That brings me to my next question. So if you said this morning that if you have numbers that are under 30, that may require further investigation. And that investigation includes looking at other contributing factors and attributes, correct?
That's correct.
I want to also clarify the context behind when you say investigating. Am I right that when you talk about investigating, are you talking about a road that has already been identified as potentially problematic by, say, the region, and then referred to Central Pavements and Foundations Unit for friction testing? Is that right?
That's correct. They may have already carried out the investigation. They may have already looked did a site investigation or a site visit, and came up with an evaluation. And one of the actions they decided on was to do some friction testing.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Commissioner.
Okay. Okay. Well, Mr. Kazmarowski, thank you very much for hearing today at the inquiry. You're excused if you wish to go. My understanding is that the next witness is traveling in from out of town. Is not available this afternoon. Is that correct? Still correct?
Yes.
So that means that we will stand adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9:30 when we will hear that witness. So if there's nothing further we have to deal with at the present time, we are adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Kazmarowski.
Thank you.
Thank you.